the U.S. Supreme Court decisions that you didn't hear about, and the judicial reasoning that could threaten religious liberty. Attorney Kyle Duncan will analyze. And later, it's been 1 year since ISIS established a caliphate. What has that meant to the region and to Christians and other minorities living there? The director of the Center for Religious Freedom, NINA SHEA, and founder of Nazarene.org, Father BENEDICT KIELY, will discuss. Actor-singer Robert DAVI is headlining the 35th annual Capitol 4th concert from Washington, D.C. He'll give us a preview and tell us what Independence Day means to him. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. A happy July 4th weekend to you. Kyle Duncan, NINA SHEA, Father BENEDICT KIELY, and Robert DAVI are straight ahead. And we'll bring you a short clip of my interview with Duck Dynasty's Cy Robertson. He's got a great new film celebrating veterans that's out this weekend. I need another hour. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, or if you have a question, I'll be live tweeting throughout the show. Find me on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email me at worldover@EWTN.com. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. The nuclear talks between the Islamic Republic of Iran and world powers have been extended again, this time for just a week. Significant disagreements persist between Iran and the P5+1 group on how and to what extent Iran will scale back its nuclear activities, as well as what types of nuclear research and development Iran could be permitted to conduct under the deal. Iran is demanding an immediate rollback of crippling sanctions, and in what could be a potential deal breaker, Iran has also balked over allowing inspections of Iranian military sites, insisting that its nuclear work is peaceful. The Islamic State is expanding its fight in the Middle East. In the Sinai Peninsula on Wednesday, dozens of ISIS militants launched simultaneous suicide bombing attacks and assaults on security installations. At least 17 Egyptian troops and 90 militants were killed in the fighting. It was Sinai's deadliest attack in decades, and according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, ISIS has executed more than 3,000 people since establishing a caliphate 1 year ago. That number includes 74 children and 86 women. With the start of Ramadan, ISIS has escalated its terror activities, killing dozens in simultaneous attacks in Kuwait, Tunisia, and France. More on ISIS later in the show. And the U.S. announced on Wednesday that formal diplomatic relations would resume between the United States and Cuba for the first time since 1961. In a Rose Garden speech, President Barack Obama also announced the reopening of an embassy in Havana later this summer. He said America doesn't have to live in the past.
With this change, we will be able to substantially increase our contacts with the Cuban people. We'll have more personnel at our embassy, and our diplomats will have the ability to engage more broadly across the island. That will include the Cuban government, civil society, and ordinary Cubans who are reaching for a better life.
Aided in secret talks by Pope Francis and the Vatican, the move comes just 6 months after the U.S. and Cuba made a surprise announcement in December that they would normalize relations. Some congresspeople warned in statements this week that the latest move could legitimize a dictatorship and shows no regard for the religious and human rights of the Cuban people. And it is not a tragedy just yet, but the Greek drama continues. Grecian creditors have halted bailout negotiations with the country's government after a deadline to pay back billions of euros came and went this week. Taking center stage is a referendum on whether to accept financial reforms and continued austerity measures in exchange for more bailout loans. The Prime Minister of Greece has staunchly advocated a no vote, but European officials and the Greek opposition have warned that a no vote would mean leaving the euro and put Greece into deeper economic peril. The country remains in limbo with banks mostly shut and strict cash withdrawal limits imposed until after the referendum. And in another jolt to the world financial system, Puerto Rico is seeking negotiations with its bondholders over $72 billion of debt. Governor Alejandro Garcia Padilla announced on Monday that the U.S. territory cannot make good on its payments. Left unchecked, both Greece and Puerto Rico face an economic collapse. Markets worldwide turned south this week. And there was a small flurry of decisions from the U.S. Supreme Court as it closed out its term this week. On Monday, the High Court put on hold a Texas abortion law, allowing the state's 19 abortion clinics to remain open. The justices voted 5-4 to grant an emergency appeal from the clinics before the new abortion law went into effect. The law requires most of the state's abortion facilities to meet the same safety standards as other surgical centers. It also requires abortion doctors to have admitting privileges to local hospitals. The Supreme Court will decide in the fall whether to hear the case. Meanwhile, the Oklahoma Supreme Court has ruled that a Ten Commandments monument on its Capitol grounds is a religious symbol and must be removed. In a 7-2 decision, the court said the display violates Oklahoma's constitutional ban on the use of public space to favor a particular religion. The court said the Ten Commandments, chiseled into a 6-foot-tall slab of granite, are, quote, obviously religious in nature and are an integral part of the Jewish and Christian faiths, end quote. The ruling overturns a previous decision by a district court judge who determined the monument could stay in place. And New Jersey Governor Chris Christie returned to his high school alma mater in Livingston, New Jersey this week to announce his candidacy for President of the United States.
I have spent the last 13 years of my life as U.S. Attorney and Governor of this state fighting for fairness and justice and opportunity for the people of the state of New Jersey. That fight has not made me more weary. It has made me stronger, and I am now ready to fight for the people of the United States of America.
The Republican governor becomes the 14th major contender in the 2016 GOP nomination. He touted his ability to work across the aisle. Christie faces an uphill battle in the wake of last year's so-called Bridgegate controversy and a sluggish New Jersey economy. Also, former Virginia Senator Jim Webb has leapt into the race to be the Democratic presidential nominee. Webb promises to bring bipartisan solutions to the country. He is the 5th Democrat to enter the presidential sweepstakes. And the Vatican on Tuesday released Pope Francis's itinerary for his upcoming visit to the U.S. The Pope's 3-city tour begins in Washington, D.C. on September 22nd, where he'll be met at the White House by President Obama. He becomes the first pope to address a joint session of Congress and will preside over the canonization of Junipero Serra. Then in New York, the Pope will speak at the United Nations and celebrate Mass at Madison Square Garden. In Philadelphia, he'll join the Church's World Meeting of Families, and in between, very tellingly, the Pope will host a meeting for religious liberty on Independence Mall with immigrants and the Hispanic community. He'll visit a soup kitchen for the homeless in D.C. and a prison in Philadelphia. The final Mass on September 27th is expected to draw 1.5 million faithful in what could be the largest gathering on U.S. soil ever. And the Vatican is doubling down on its fight against climate change, recruiting help from outside the faith. Canadian journalist, eco-crusader, and virulent anti-capitalist Naomi Klein was tapped this week to participate in a climate change conference at the Vatican. A self-described secular Jewish feminist, she was invited to the event by the president of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, Cardinal Peter Turkson. During a Vatican press conference on Wednesday, Klein said she shared the Pope's opinion that today's economics are adversely affecting the environment.
That's why a new kind of climate movement is fast emerging. It is based on the most courageous truth expressed in the encyclical, that our current economic system is both fueling the climate crisis and actively preventing us from taking the necessary actions to avert it.
Earlier in the week, climate change activists from around the world gathered in Rome to praise the Pope for issuing his environmental encyclical. And in his Sunday Angelus, Francis saluted the marchers, welcoming them to St. Peter's Square. And finally, Nicholas Winton, the man who almost single-handedly saved more than 650 Jewish children from the Holocaust, has died. He was 106. Earning the label Britain's Schindler, Winton was a 29-year-old stock exchange clerk in 1938 when he began to fear, correctly, that Jewish residents of Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia would be sent to concentration camps. Winton arranged trains to carry Jewish children from occupied Prague to Britain, battling bureaucracy at both ends and saving them from almost certain death. Not wanting any attention in the matter, he kept quiet about his exploits for half a century. What a hero. May Nicholas Winton rest in peace. When we return, Kyle Duncan joins me to discuss how the judicial reasoning of the recent Supreme Court rulings could affect religious liberty. And we'll unpack some of those rulings when The World Over Live continues in a moment. We've got much more. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. With the Supreme Court's landmark decision in the Obamacare case and legalizing same-sex marriage, how might religious liberties be impacted? And what does the reasoning behind these rulings really tell us? To analyze, I'm joined by the original lead counsel for the Hobby Lobby religious freedom case, formerly of the Becket Fund, attorney Kyle Duncan. Kyle, thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me on.
I want to ask you in the macro here, as you look at all the rulings, or the majority of the rulings we saw this term from the Supreme Court, what does the legal reasoning that you saw there in those decisions tell us about the direction of this court and the mindset?
It's hard to sum up an entire term in one quote, although I think I'll try. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, in his dissent in the same-sex marriage case, said something striking to me and a little poignant. He said, "Just who do we think we are?" And I think that summarizes sort of the feelings that many have, maybe some on the court have, about the court's work. It's a sense of not fully understanding what the role of the court is in our constitutional democracy. Is it an umpire calling balls and strikes, as Chief Justice Roberts said in his confirmation hearings? In other words, neutrally applying objective rules of law, regardless of the particular outcome,
or case.
Or is it becoming more of a political body that picks and chooses certain preconceived results, certain policy outcomes that certain justices think are desirable over others, and achieves the result through reasoning that may not seem terribly persuasive to some people? So I think who is the Supreme Court and what is its role in our constitutional democracy is a question that's raised by some of the big decisions this term.
Let's get into some of them. This is a little bit from Judge Roberts' majority opinion in the King versus Burwell case, the so-called Obamacare case. He writes, "In a democracy, the power to make the law rests with those chosen by the people. Our role, the courts, is more confined to say what the law is. That is easier in some cases than in others. But in every case, we must respect the role of the legislature and take care not to undo what it has done. A fair reading of legislation demands a fair understanding of the legislative plan." So in that case, just to remind people, and you can shed some light on this too, they found language in the law that really wasn't in the law. The law required that if a state set up an exchange, well, then they could be, the people could be beneficiaries of this, what do you call it?
The subsidies, the tax credits. Right.
But if they didn't set up the exchanges, if the state didn't set up an exchange, then no subsidies could come to those individuals. The Supreme Court said, you got to interpret what they meant.
That's right, Raymond. The words that Congress actually put down in the statute required that subsidies could only flow through an exchange established by a state, not by the federal government, not by the federal HHS, only an exchange established by the state. That was language deliberately chosen by Congress, and Congress, of course, assumed that states would set up exchanges because Congress gave them incentives to do so, but the problem was, is at 34 or something like that, states did not. And so the question is, what is the Supreme Court going to do with that? Is it going to interpret the words established by a state to be established by a state or by the federal government or by the HHS? And that's what the majority of the court actually did.
Here's what Justice Scalia said in his dissent. He wrote, "Today's interpretation is not merely unnatural, it is unheard of. Who would ever have dreamt that, quote, exchange established by the state, end quote, means exchange established by the state or the federal government? Little short of an expressed statutory definition could justify adopting this singular reading. We should start calling this law SCOTUS care." Your reaction?
My reaction is that Justice Scalia has always been a champion of textualism, of actually reading the words and applying the words that Congress has given the court, because that's important to separation of powers. Frankly, the court doesn't legislate. The court only interprets and applies law. It doesn't legislate. And if it gets into the business of interpreting laws in one way because it perceives that Congress might have wanted this particular outcome, the court starts shading into legislation, legislative power and not judicial power, and that's a real problem for Justice Scalia. I think it's a problem for the Chief Justice as well. And in this case, he obviously struggled because his majority opinion says that, you know, the plain meaning of the provision, quote, arguments for the plain meaning are strong. He admitted in his majority opinion, and yet he interpreted those words in light of what he perceived as the overall purposes of the act, and I think that's what drew the sharp criticisms from Justice Scalia.
Well, here's the thing where you have to connect the dots on this. In the Burwell King case, Justice Roberts says, look, we're interpreting it this way. Then in the gay marriage case, in his dissent, he decries the Supreme Court finding new laws or discovering things. But that's just what they did in the majority opinion in the Obamacare case, in both of them. They discovered new language, new meanings, created what was a fee is now a tax. I mean, it does sort of boggle the imagination after a time. I want to read this quote, get your reaction. Sure. Justice Kennedy wrote in his majority opinion of the gay marriage case, Obergefell versus Hodges. He writes, saying that there is an equal protection at play here. The right to marry is a fundamental right inherent in the liberty of the person. And under due process and equal protection clauses of the 14th Amendment, couples of the same sex may not be deprived of that right and that liberty. Now, Justice Roberts, who we just spoke about a moment ago, wrote in his dissent to the same opinion, if you are among the many Americans of whatever sexual orientation who favor expanding same-sex marriage, by all means celebrate today's decision. But do not celebrate the Constitution. It has nothing to do with it. Here's my question. Have these two decisions taken in tandem, do they stretch the Constitution out to the point that it becomes silly putty, where we're finding now a right to dignity? Is there a constitutional right to dignity?
I think the question raised by both of these decisions, but especially by the same-sex marriage case, is whether the court is actually applying neutral principles of constitutional law. It raises a question about the legitimacy of the court. And I think Chief Justice Roberts raises that question and some of the other dissenting judges. And by legitimacy, I think they mean, does the public perceive the court as a neutral body that is applying principles of constitutional law that it actually finds in the document? And in the document, in the text of the document, in the context, in the history of the document? Or is it inventing rights because it perceives that this is a good idea? And that's what Chief Justice Roberts is saying, as well as Justice Scalia, Justice Thomas, and Justice Alito. And I think that raises serious questions about the legitimacy of the court. And by legitimacy, I don't mean that people are going to rush out and not obey the court's decision, because you don't see that happening. I think it's very important to our constitutional democracy that people respect the court, that respect the decisions the court's making, that respects the process through which the court is making decisions. After all, we don't vote on the members of the court. The members of the court have immense power. They are appointed for life. We have a great institutional respect for the court. And I think some of the things that Chief Justice Roberts and others are saying in this case is that they're concerned that the court is resolving an issue on which so many Americans disagree.
Well, weren't you astounded by the scope of this? I mean, they could have very narrowly said, look, in some states this is legal, in others it isn't. You could have even said, if you're married in Massachusetts, it has to be recognized in other states, but those other states don't have to play host to nor grant marriage licenses. Why didn't they go down that path?
Well, of course, I don't know why they didn't go down that path, but you're right, Raymond, that the decision is sweeping. What the decision essentially says is that it's a matter of substantive due process, which is a part of the Constitution that's not actually written in the Constitution, but is a part of our, let's call it our fundamental commitments in our nation. The court has found that gender cannot be part of the institution of marriage, so that the definition of marriage that was embraced by every state since the beginning of the country until 2003, well over 200 years, the court has now declared that to have been unconstitutional, or at least since 1868 when the 14th Amendment was adopted. That's a profound thing that the court did, and it's sweeping. And I think those who are concerned about the breadth of the court's decisions have good reason to be concerned, and good reason to be concerned about what this means for the rights of dissenters going forward.
We were talking before the show. How does this compare to the EU's position on marriage?
So the European Court of Human Rights has had a couple of cases on this and has decided that the nations of the European Union need to be allowed to go whichever way they want on this issue, because this issue is one that's profound, that arises from culture. It's profoundly sensitive, it's profoundly difficult, it's profoundly divisive, and so even the European Court of Human Rights has seen fit not to impose this on all the nations of the European Union, and our court in the United States has now gone, let's say, to the left of that. So that's striking.
What do you believe this portends for religious liberty? I heard today an interview on C-SPAN radio with one of the leaders at Lambda Legal, which is a gay rights legal shop. They wish to move forward expeditiously with protections, gay rights protections for housing, employment, and public accommodation. What does that mean?
Well, I think in their terms they would call it full equality. They want gays and lesbians to be, to have every protection known to the law, so that, for example, if we all know the case of the wedding photographer. If a wedding photographer says, look, I have a conscientious objection to participating in a same-sex marriage, the folks on that side of the debate want essentially gay and lesbian rights to be equated with race, essentially, so that it would be, it would be totally and completely unacceptable, both as a matter of law and as a matter of sort of social policy, for anyone to object to same-sex marriage. Now, to be fair to the Supreme Court did include some few sentences about the rights of the First Amendment rights of religious objectors, to religious dissenters, to teach and advocate.
Now, but doesn't that mean within the four walls? That's what it increasingly sounds like.
I think the concern here is that it was framed in narrow terms, which Chief Justice Roberts pointed out, that we don't have a teach and advocate clause in the Constitution. We actually have a written clause in the Constitution that guarantees the free exercise of religion, and that we should be concerned if the Supreme Court seems to be cutting back on that in this particular realm, where there's such cultural, political, and frankly economic power on the other side to punish dissenters.
I have to ask you about another case. I know you've been intimately involved in a similar case in Louisiana. In Texas, the Supreme Court let stand a stay that kept an abortion bill passed by the Texas legislature, signed into law, from going into effect. What does it essentially say? what is at risk here?
The laws in Texas, and they're being litigated in other states as well, including Louisiana, they essentially do two things. They require outpatient abortion providers to have admitting privileges at local hospitals, meaning they have to have privileges to be able to admit their patients who undergo complications that require hospitalization. That's common in many states that have been litigating. Texas adds that the outpatient abortion clinics have to satisfy the requirements for ambulatory surgical centers in their physical plant and whatnot. And so this law in Texas has been litigated. It's gone up and down to the Fifth Circuit in the U.S. Supreme Court several times. It seems that if the law went into effect, it would shut a number of abortion clinics in Texas. It wouldn't reduce them completely, but it would reduce them to something like 7 or 8 abortion clinics. The Fifth Circuit, in a resounding decision, upheld the operation of that law. And what the Supreme Court has done is essentially put that law on hold while the court decides whether to take the case. I think we shouldn't read too much into that.
That's what I was going to ask you. I mean, by a majority, they decided to hold the law. Which is what a lot of the abortion providers wanted, claiming that this is a violation to a woman's right to have an abortion. Her right to privacy is being violated here.
That's right.
And access to an abortion.
Right. And of course, on the other side, what states like Texas and Louisiana, and I represent Louisiana in this case, are saying is that no, this is a common sense provision to protect women's health and safety. That if women who undergo complications in abortions, and it's admitted that women do undergo complications that sometimes require hospitalization, that it's better for the patient, for the doctor to be able to admit the patient to the hospital. This also protects the integrity of the medical profession because by requiring privileging or credentialing at hospitals, we're able to check on the background of the doctors and make sure that they're providing good medicine in these clinics. And so, so what we have here is a health and safety regulation that's pitted against the so-called right to privacy. And the Supreme Court is going to have to work this out, whether it does in the Texas case, a case from Mississippi that's currently also pending in the Supreme Court, or the Louisiana case remains to be seen.
Okay, I want to put something, as we have 2 minutes left, I just want to kind of put this in some context. As I look at the cases and I read through the findings and the rulings, and I casually read these, not the way you do, one comes away, and I came away thinking of that 1996 symposium that my friend Father Richard Newhouse hosted in First Things. And it was called The End of Democracy, the Judicial Usurpation of Politics. Is that what we're facing here? See, and I'm not arguing about the issue or even the way they were decided. People are going to come down at all different sides on these things, whether it's Obamacare or it's gay marriage. I'm concerned about the reasoning or non-reasoning of this court, arbitrarily creating rights and dreaming up new provisions or seeing words that aren't there. Doesn't that undermine our freedoms and the democracy and this republic as an experiment?
Well, Raymond, I think we should be concerned about who rules us. And Justice Scalia said this very well in his dissent in the marriage case. He said it wasn't a particular concern to him what marriage was in the law, but what was of particular concern to him was who ruled him. And it seemed to him that the 5 justices on the Supreme Court had sort of declared themselves the rulers of 320 million Americans on this issue, the definition of marriage that has always been thought to be a fundamental issue for the citizens of the state. And if the Supreme Court can usurp that, that's your word, can blow by that, and say, we're going to tell you what marriage means, we're going to tell you what the direction of marriage is, then the question is, on what issue could they not say that? No. And as I sit here with you, I can't think of one. So I think we should be concerned.
Compare this very quickly, because we still have 1 minute, Counselor. How do you compare, there are people who say, oh, this is the end of Christianity, we're under persecution. As you look at the international scene and how people are being treated abroad, compare what we're facing in this country to what other people are facing.
Well, Raymond, as you know, you're going to have some guests on to talk about the situation of Christians in the Middle East. And those people are facing dire and horrific persecution. We are not facing that in the United States. And we should be grateful for that. What we should do is recognize that we have the blessings of liberty, and we should try to keep them by recognizing, again, who rules us, and whether we should maybe rule ourselves on some issues. So we're not being killed like so many Christians in the Middle East, and we shouldn't pretend that we are. Yeah. But we should perhaps find some courage to actually profess what we believe as Catholics, and to fight for the same principles that that our founding fathers fought for, which is the ability to rule ourselves.
Kyle Duncan, thank you for being
Thanks for
here.
having me.
We'll be in touch. When we return, NINA SHEA and Father Benedict Kiely join me to discuss the imminent dangers ISIS poses to minorities and Christians in Iraq and Syria. Robert DAVI and Uncle Cy Robertson are coming up when The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Following the establishment of a caliphate by ISIS a year ago, life for Christians in Iraq and Syria has gotten considerably worse. Many countries in the region are at their capacity to take in any more refugees. What to do with these people fleeing persecution? Joining us to discuss the dire situation facing Syrian Christians and others and what Western countries can or should do. We're joined by NINA SHEA, Director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute, and Father Benedict Kiely, founder of Nazarene.org, an organization focused on raising funds and awareness for the needs of Christians in Iraq and Syria. Thank you both for being here. NINA, I want to start with you. What is the toll a year into this caliphate and the ISIS menace that we're seeing all over the Middle East?
Well, it's immeasurable because every Christian in Iraq basically has been pushed out of Iraq proper into camps, into makeshift housing in Kurdistan or in neighboring countries. They have lost their lands, lost their homelands, and ISIS has become entrenched in Mosul and in Nineveh Plain. They have taken Christian women and Yazidi women as slaves, and girls, not just women, but girls and children as slaves, sex slaves. They're selling them in the marketplaces. They have eradicated the manuscripts, burned the manuscripts, blown up monasteries from the 4th century, destroyed churches, taken down crosses. It's just, they have lost their heritage, their culture. Some of them have lost their lives, and they have lost their future.
You were telling me earlier about signs that are hanging in recently occupied towns.
Yes, there have been signs posted now with the lists of prices for Christian and Yazidi female slaves. The most expensive are the 1 to 9-year-olds, going for $172. The UN, it's just unfathomable. It's ghastly. It's monstrous. And slavery has been eradicated throughout the world, and now they're reviving it, and that's what they are calling it in their glossy English language propaganda magazine, the revival of slavery. They're publishing rules about how young, there's no limit. You know, what happens if you die, what happens to your slave? Well, this is real chattel slavery we're talking about. And
where is the world? Where is the UN? Where's the United States? Where are the Western powers? We're hearing nothing about this.
We're not hearing about that. We're hearing about how ISIS is destabilizing this area, but we're not hearing about the toll to Christianity, these 2,000-year-old civilizations, or to the girls and women who are in ISIS path.
And we've got Westerners running these bordellos.
British women are running the ISIS bordellos who have migrated there for the caliphate, and the caliphate has made all the difference in this, because it's really setting a new state, a new civilization, a heaven on earth is what they think of it as. And so there has to be lots of women to attract these endless supply of jihadist men.
I want to come back to you in a moment because we have some news to share with people. Father Kiely, you were just in Kurdistan. You visited these camps. Now, many of these Christians are avoiding the UN refugee camps.
They're avoiding the UN camps, and we've just heard that the UN is going to withdraw its food assistance to the Syrians in September, or August, September, so 500,000 Syrians won't have. The church, I have to say, we can be very proud of the church for the help that they're giving, the practical help. I was there, I saw the signs for aid to the church in need, Catholic Near East Welfare, Samaritan's Purse, our Protestant brothers and sisters. What we're not getting, unfortunately, from the church is the vocal anger, the vocal support for these poor people and for their future. There's a giant yawn from the church.
So is it the local church that's primarily engaged?
The local church, the priests are running the camps there. The priests are exhausted. They're in what they call containers, sort of construction units that we have. The people are living. They've moved in a sort of 3 stages from when they were on the streets last summer to tents or abandoned buildings. Now they're in these containers, but the priests are running the camps. The nuns are running the little schools. All of these people are refugees, IDPs as they're called, refugees really. And there's a mixture of defiance and despair. Defiance will go back, but reality is despair. Who's going to help us?
What are they telling you now? Do they want to stay? We hear from some of the local clergy. I had archbishops sitting in the seats you're sitting in from the region saying, no, 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 the people have to stay. We want everyone to stay here. They're bleeding in the streets. They're blowing them up during services. What should be going on, and what are the people there telling you?
There's a mixture, but the priests are trying to be positive and keep the people thinking, we'll go home, but in private they were telling me they don't see it. One priest said it'll be a generation. He said, get us out. He said, we can rebuild community, but we can't rebuild people. They want to be allowed to leave, and unfortunately, we understand why the hierarchy, because the culture, they don't want the entire culture to be destroyed, but the people may be killed. So it's better to get them out, and so we're moving towards now encouraging emigration, but the question is, who's going to take them?
And Nina, this begs the question, who is going to take them? Who is welcoming them? I mean, Jordan is to capacity at this point, and who knows, God forbid, but how much longer they're going to be able to shelter anybody, because they're surrounded now.
Yeah, in Lebanon, we're swamping the lifeboat there. There's so many there. But I got a call today from a friend of yours who said to say hello. It's Hollywood producer Mark Burnett.
Oh, good.
And he is on board with the idea, this movement that we're now part of, that is to get them out, to rescue them.
How do you do that? What's the plan?
The plan is evolving, but we're making there's so many Christians in both Iraq and Syria, and right now Syria is very much of concern because ISIS is attacking Aleppo and Damascus and Hasaka, the major cities right now as we speak. Those Christians are in danger of losing their lives or their freedom as slaves. So we're making this a priority. We're trying to get charter planes. We have to...
so you're going to airlift the Christians out of the region? We're going to
airlift them out. And we're starting with the Armenians. We don't want to see a second Armenian genocide. The Armenian, they have a homeland of Armenia, and their bishop is saying it's time to go because they are in danger. And from there, we want to work for the other Christians. There's Catholic, there's Protestants, there's Orthodox, many, over 1 million probably in Syria, and then from there, Iraq, if they have no future either.
So how can people help with this effort?
If people want to help rescue these Christians, save their lives, save the girls from the sex slavery, they can contribute to these air charters, and they can contribute by giving sending checks to cradlefund.org. Cradle as in Cradle of Christianity. That's Mark Burnett and Roma Downey, the Hollywood Producers Foundation, and they are committed to helping get the airlifts
Cradlefund.org. No, it seems this situation is so dire now. I mean, ISIS has all but taken Syria. There's really only Damascus left. How much longer can that stand?
It's a very dire situation, and it's compounded by the fact that they have war booty from Mosul, $27 billion worth of American armament and equipment that they took as spoils of war last year. So little Christian militias are trying, but there's really no hope. And there is no, as Father said, the UN is cutting off food because this is an untenable situation of just millions of refugees that's been going on for so long now.
But world governments are not giving, they're not answering their responsibilities. And this is part of our other challenge is making the West in particular realize that we have a responsibility. We're watching, as one person described to me in Iraq, a slow-motion genocide. The priests, the nuns, the people are saying, why is the church not speaking up? Why is it not being called a genocide? Where is the worldwide prayer campaign?
I was going to ask, where's the spiritual response to this? I mean, there doesn't seem to
be any? I mean, every now and then, in our parish, somebody will have a little intention in the Middle of for the Christians in the Middle East.
Very little awareness here.
None. Nobody realizes that there are brothels opening and they're selling little children into sex slavery.
Yeah. Well, when I was there as a priest, I was asking the other priests, and perhaps it's a little bit different to be a priest rather than a member of an NGO, I was asking them that specific question for the spiritual needs, and they were all saying we need more prayer. I suggested to them perhaps we would ask the Pope, petition the Pope for a worldwide rosary. St. Pius V saved Western civilization by ordering a worldwide rosary, and the Battle of Lepanto destroyed the invasion. We could ask every bishop and every priest in the world to say the rosary once a week, 15 minutes. It's not much to ask for, but the power of that prayer would be extraordinary. And they were all saying, please do this, please pray for us.
Did you talk to Muslims in these camps in this area?
There were no Muslims in those particular camps. They're all Christians. But I did have supper the second to last night with a very nice Muslim man. His brother and father were killed by Al-Qaeda, blown up by Al-Qaeda. His hope, of course, is that Kurdistan would be a secular state and give freedom, promise freedom. We have to keep the pressure on, though.
Yeah, because the Kurds are they're really kind of hands-off. They're letting people stay there, but there's no real assistance.
I met with a Kurdish representative to the United States just 2 weeks ago, and she told me that they are almost financially bankrupt, that they're in very serious trouble themselves. Baghdad is not supplying them with any help. They're not passing through the weapons or the funds from their oil proceeds. And the Peshmerga haven't been paid for 3 months. So it's a dire situation.
And there's a long history of distrust as well between the Christians and the Kurds.
Right. And the Peshmerga, this is the real last line of defense for these people.
Yeah,
these fighters.
That's the only army that has been effective so far in taking back any land that's been taken from by ISIS. You know, you asked about the Muslims. I am a vice chair of a foundation that helps educate Christian Iraqi refugees in Jordan and Erbil in Kurdistan, and our program director, who is a Muslim woman, we had to work to evacuate her this week. She got death threats from ISIS that on her cell phone saying that they knew her family lived in Jordan as well. She got the death threats in Erbil. We have families going to school, their children are going to school in Catholic schools in Jordan. These are refugees, Iraqi Christian refugees. They're telling us that all the time they're getting knocks at the door at night in Jordan saying convert or pay the tax or die. So Christians are targeted, and anyone who's helping them is also at risk. So it's...
Father, you want to add anything before we run out of time? What should people do?
I would ask the people to speak to their bishops, to ask their bishops to petition the Holy Father, to call for a worldwide rosary. I would ask for them not to think this is something that is unimportant. Remember, Jesus said to St. Paul on the road to Damascus, "Why are you persecuting me?" They are our brothers and sisters. We must care about them. We must do something. But worldwide prayer from the Holy Father, and if the Holy Father spoke up about emigration, help these people, spoke to the Western leaders, open your doors, it would make all the difference.
Very good. Nina Shea, Father Kiely, thank you both
for
being here and for all your help. To help the effort that Nina mentioned, these air charters, you can go to cradlefund.org. I'm going to tweet that out after the show. And of course, Nazarene.org is Father Kiely's organization, doing such a great job. When we return, it's been America's favorite televised Independence Day celebration for 35 years. Actor and singer Robert DAVI will be part of this year's celebration. He joins us to preview the Capitol 4th concert from Washington, D.C., and Cy Robertson's new film, Faith of Our Fathers, will be coming up next. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest is taking part in the 35th Annual All-Star Independence Day Concert from D.C., a Capitol 4th. It's watched on PBS by millions of Americans and on American Forces Network by our troops serving abroad. He is an award-winning actor, best known for his work in Goonies, Die Hard, and of course as a Bond villain. He's a screenwriter, a director, and a vocalist. To tell us about his role in this year's concert and more, we're joined by our pal
Robert DAVI. Robert, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me,
Great
Raymond.
to see you. Now,
great to see
you're
you.
going
Vocalist?
Vocalist.
Vocalist.
Why? What do you want to be known as? Singer?
Jazz singer.
Jazz singer. You're a vocalist.
No,
you're more than a jazz singer.
I know.
Jazz singers like Nina Simone.
Well, she was wonderful.
Yeah, but your range is a little broader here. You're almost, you've got operatic and then
vocalist
you've got the jazz.
Like, yes.
Well, I'm trying to.
Thank you very much.
I'm trying to be honest here. Honest broker.
Yes,
Tell me about Independence Day. Your father was a veteran. What does this day mean to you?
Oh,
what did he teach you?
Well, you got to, first, something very emotional happened recently when I was in Italy. I did The Voice in Italy. I was the guest artist because of my friend J-Ax, who's the big rapper
in Italy,
yeah, he's amazing. He's one of the judges there. So I was the guest for their Sinatra tribute, and afterwards, the town that my grandfather, my father's father, Franco DAVI, that's how we say it here, was from. And my grandmother, Maria Carola. So they got in touch with me and are going to make me an honorary citizen of Torretta. But they sent me a plaque that's in the city of my grandfather, who I never knew, had a brother whose name was Salvatore. Now, my father's name was Salvatore. And on the plaque, the name is DAVI, D-A-V-I apostrophe. And they told me that the name is really spelled D-A-V-I apostrophe, D-A-V-I, DAVI. Yeah. And so my father's father, Franco DAVI, was in the U.S. infantry for World War I.
Oh, wow.
I just found out a week ago that his brother, I found out on actually my birthday, the day before my birthday, that my grandfather had a brother who was killed in the Austrian-Italian War, in that World War I. And my father was a World War II vet for the Navy. He was a gunner on a merchant marine ship, as well as a lot of my uncles, and a lot of other Americans, of course. But my father, every 4th of July, Veterans Day and Memorial Day, put on his Navy uniform and raised that American flag. So for me, there's a huge, huge moment to be able to hear at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. on the birth of our nation, and being able to tribute someone who was so meaningful in my career.
Yeah, now this is really a two-part tribute. You're tributing America, and you're tributing someone very near and dear to us, and particularly to you, a man who really was instrumental in your film career.
Yeah, he was had my first film with Frank Sinatra in 1977, Contract on Cherry Street, and when I started singing, I started doing these tribute to him. And the Great American Songbook, which is the Shakespeare of America, because it's the amalgam of the American experience. You know, it comes from the black jazz and gent blues artists, and the Welsh, Irish, Scottish, English, German, Norwegian, Irish, Lebanese, who've been here since the Revolutionary War, and a large portion from the sons and daughters of Jewish immigrants. So this amalgam of the American experience, that Sinatra, you needed the Italian to sing it, of course, is just wonderful to be able to celebrate that on this PBS special that the Colberts have been producing. Capital Fourth.
Yeah, it's a beautiful moment. Now, tell me how this came to be. First of all, when I heard Robert DAVI was going to be singing at the Capitol Fourth, and this is a star-studded affair. Barry Manilow, Alabama, Casey and the Sunshine Band. I could go on. Lang Lang, the pianist.
Nicole Zwirling there.
When you were asked to take part in this, what did you think? What did you want to sing?
Well, of course, my dream would have been to sing The House I Live In, because what is America to me? That lyric, I do it in my show, and it gets an amazing response. I also did it with David Foster at a charity event, and I said to David, I says, this will get the crowd. He goes, really? I says, yeah. He says, watch. And afterwards, when the standing ovation happened, he goes, hey, you were right, you know, because it's such a powerful song and typifies our country here. But that being said, in this tribute to Sinatra, there'll be a moment of that which is very stirring, and I then will come on and give my tribute, which will be a song that will have everyone hopefully on their feet.
Tell me what it's been like for you over these last few years since you recorded that Sinatra album. What has it been like touring not only the country but the world?
Yeah, I toured Australia. I just got back from Latvia, Sweden, Budapest.
Is the reaction the same, no matter where you go to this music?
Yeah. America
Why is it?
What
do you think it is?
Because I just said how I framed what the American Songbook is as the Shakespeare of America, and the amalgam of the cultures that helped go into making this songbook. It translates around the world, because there's something that just is. I just did the United Nations. I did the Presidential Gala for the Transformative Power of Music, Tuesday night. And they had some of the greatest African artists there, and the Watutu Children's Choir from Uganda, and as well as Bob Marley's son, K-Money Marley. Just a wide variety. Musical director is Robin DiMaggio. And it was just an amazing, very emotional moment. But here it is, all these cultures at the United Nations that responded to the music because of that experience.
That's so human. I mean, and particularly the music that Frank Sinatra epitomized. There's a deep humanity and truth in it. I think it covers really all the ages of man, from birth to death, really. It's an incredible, journey.
Well, it can, and that's the American Songbook, and he sang it and interpreted it, I think, better than anyone.
Not like no one else. Well, you're keeping up with him. Tell me
what. Well, that'll take a bit.
What do you want people to take away from this concert, from your participation in it this year as they watch on PBS?
Well, I want them to be entertained and feel like they've had the best set at home, and that PBS brought them, and the Colberts here, the Capitol concerts, and also this is by our nation's gift to the people, and to sit back and feel that the cohesive unity in this very difficult time that we're feeling in our country, that this is a moment for reflection of unity. You know, Raymond, when Martin Luther King died, I was a little kid, and I watched this funeral. And I watched on TV in a pine box pulled by 2 mules in a rickety carton, the totality of the human struggle and a sea of people behind him. And I thought to myself, at that age, we're either going to pull it apart or we're going to pull it together. And now what happened in South Carolina, and we saw the response, the Christian response of love, of forgiveness, the absolute epitome of what Christ has said, and the example of that in terms of forgiveness, no matter how difficult that is for people. So that's what we have to bring forward, and that's what the music is about. It's about bringing love to the world. And look, we're in a dangerous world.
No doubt.
I'm a realist. I'm not, you know what I mean? I understand we have to be, but the essence of it all is us being cohesive as a nation and bring that forward to the world.
Yeah, and to celebrate the great glories of this nation amid the shadows that are
Yes, I mean, America is the... Look, people can argue about what policies a human being made while in office, but the idea of America, that shining city on a hill, that's an amazing place, and no matter where I went in the world, American exceptionalism is alive and well.
Thank you so much for bringing
Raymond,
unity to so many, and we'll be watching for you this year.
The world over, brother.
You're
Take
kind.
care.
Thank you. Robert Davi, CD. Davi Sings Sinatra on the Road to Romance is available online and via download on iTunes and Spotify. A Capital Fourth airs Saturday, July 4th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on PBS. Check your local listings for the PBS station in your area. It's always a grand affair and worth your time. And before we go, there's a moving new film honoring our nation's veterans, releasing this Independence Day weekend. It's called Faith of Our Fathers. Co-written, produced, and starring Christian filmmaker Kevin Downs. It features an appearance by Duck Dynasty's Uncle Cy Robertson. And it is the story of 2 men who lost their fathers in Vietnam and their journey of discovery. Here's a quick preview. This is really a pilgrimage of 2 sons going to find their fathers who they lost in Vietnam, lost track of, didn't have any contact with. And along the way they find what?
This is not a combat horror film, okay, like some of them are, okay, that shows the horrors of war.
That's right.
Okay, this is more about, it's a love story about a father's love for their sons. Okay, they wasn't present, okay, but the love was there. And the kids didn't realize it until they start diving in and reading these letters from their fathers. Okay, and then when they actually start to find out about who they are, okay, it fills that hole, or it heals that wound that they've had in their heart. Okay, it's why the more I do these interviews, the more the film becomes It has got a great message, okay? It really has.
The themes are brought up in a very unique way, somewhat of a very original way, that aren't sort of a one tone. There's multiple tones that are played out in this film. And it's the brilliance of having Cy, not just because he's a Vietnam veteran himself, which was incredibly important, but because he's so funny.
Yeah, hey, it's me down at the gas station. Look, hey, send me 3 or 4 deputies. Hey, I got a brawl going again. Uh-oh, you're not gonna believe this, okay? The yuppie just took down Goliath, okay, with an oil can to the head.
And we needed that funniness and that moment as these guys were bridging their road trip together.
More than welcome to read my Bible. Might make you feel better.
You wouldn't be preparing my men for death now, would you, soldier?
No, Sarge. Absolutely not.
I always struggled with my belief in God. But I'm thinking about it. There's a verse that Stephen keeps telling me about. Greater love has no one than this, that he laid down his life for his friends.
Your dad got my dad to read the Bible.
I got your back. No, you're staying right here.
Not a chance.
I got you covered! Go! Do you think I still have time to make that choice?
He loves you as much as you love Wayne, and he'd die for you, just like you would die for Wayne. Here is temporary, but paradise with him is eternity.
Faith of Our Fathers is in theaters everywhere. We'll bring you the full interview with Cy Robertson next week. You will not want to miss that, Jack. Also, be sure to visit the EWTN Facebook page and my Facebook page and Twitter feed for a chance to win a galley of my new middle grade supernatural thriller, Will Wilder, The Relic of Perilous Falls. If you tweet or post the cover, you are instantly registered to win a free early copy of the book. I'll announce the winners next week. Also, if you'd like me to visit your school, library, or group as part of my Will Wilder book tour next March, email me at raymond@raymondarroyo.com. raymond@raymondarroyo.com. Put book in the subject line. Looking forward to that. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Don't miss our show, our exclusive interview with Duck Dynasty's Cy Robertson, and much more. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.